Have you ever noticed how some of the most profound truths in life come to us in the most unexpected moments? You know, those quiet instances when the universe seems to whisper directly to your soul. Well, my friends, I want to share something with you today that came to me during one such moment of divine clarity. I was sitting in my study looking out at the ocean, something I do every morning as part of my spiritual practice. The waves were rolling in one after another in their eternal dance with the shore. And as I watched, I noticed something fascinating. When each wave retreated, it didn't fight to stay. It didn't cling desperately to the sand. It simply let go. And in that letting go, it became part of something far greater, the vast, powerful ocean itself. That's when it hit me. The truth I'm here to share with you today. Sometimes the most powerful statement we can make is through our absence, not our presence. Act as if your absence is the best revenge. But wait, before you misunderstand me, this isn't about revenge in the way most people think of it. This is about something far more transformative, far more spiritual. How many of you have ever found yourself in a situation where you felt undervalued, where you kept trying harder and harder to prove your worth to someone who simply refused to see it? You see, my friends, we've been conditioned to believe that the answer is to fight harder, to prove ourselves more, to make our presence so overwhelming that it cannot be ignored. But what if I told you that this approach is exactly what's keeping you trapped in a cycle of pain and disappointment? When I first began exploring this concept, I remembered a friend. Let's call him Michael. Michael was an incredibly talented artist who worked at an advertising agency. For years, he poured his heart and soul into his work, consistently delivering brilliant ideas only to have them dismissed or credited to others. He would stay late, come in early, fight for recognition, argue his case in meetings, essentially trying to force others to acknowledge his value. The more he fought for recognition, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. It was as if the universe was trying to teach him a profound lesson, one that he, like many of us, was resistant to learning. Now, conventional wisdom might suggest that Michael needed to fight harder, to make more noise, to demand his due. But that's not what happened. Instead, Michael did something that seemed counterintuitive at first. He stepped, not in anger, not in spite, but in profound self-respect and understanding of his own worth. He stopped trying to prove himself to people who weren't ready to see his value. He began focusing his energy on projects that truly inspired him, regardless of whether they brought him recognition. And most importantly, he started acting as if his absence was indeed the best response to those who had undervalued him. But here's the crucial part, my friends, and this is where many people misunderstand this principle. This isn't about playing games or trying to manipulate others into missing you. It's about something far more profound. It's about honoring your own divine nature. You see, each of us is a unique expression of the infinite intelligence that creates worlds. When we desperately try to prove our worth to others, we're actually denying this fundamental truth. We're saying, I need your validation to be complete. But nothing could be further from the truth. Does the sun need to convince anyone of its ability to shine? Does a flower need to argue for its right to bloom? Does the ocean need to justify its waves? Of course not. They simply are what they are, expressing their nature fully and completely. This is where the true power of acting as if your absence is the best revenge comes into play. It's not about revenge at all. It's about reclaiming your power, about remembering who you truly are. When you begin to act from this place of inner knowing, something miraculous happens. The energy you were using to prove yourself, to fight for recognition, to demand respect, all of that energy becomes available for your own growth and evolution. Let me share another truth with you. Energy flows where attention goes. When you're constantly focused on proving your worth to others, you're actually giving away your power. You're saying, my value is determined by your recognition of it. But when you step back, not in anger, but in self-love, you reclaim that energy. Think about a time in your life when you finally let go of something you'd been struggling with. Remember that feeling of relief, of freedom? That's just a glimpse of what's possible when you truly understand and apply this principle. I remember working with a woman who had spent years trying to win the approval of her critical mother-in-law. Every holiday, every family gathering became an exhausting exercise in trying to prove herself worthy. She would cook elaborate meals, keep an immaculate house, raise her children perfectly, all in an attempt to win approval that never came. Then one day, she had an epiphany. She realized that all this striving wasn't just exhausting her, it was teaching her children that their worth needed to be earned through others' approval. And in that moment, she made a decision that changed everything. She decided to stop seeking approval and start living authentically. This wasn't about cutting ties or creating drama. Instead, she simply stopped investing her energy in winning approval. She began cooking meals she enjoyed, keeping her house in a way that worked for her family and raising her children according to her own values. And something remarkable happened. The power dynamic shifted. Not because she was trying to make it shift, but because she had aligned herself with a fundamental truth of the universe. Your worth is inherent, not earned. But let me be clear about something, my friends. This principle of acting as if your absence is the best revenge isn't about withdrawal or isolation. It's not about building walls or harboring resentment. It's about something far more powerful. It's about presence, true presence with yourself. When you stop pouring your energy into proving your worth to others, you create space for something magnificent to emerge. You begin to discover parts of yourself that were hidden beneath all that striving and seeking. You begin to hear your own inner wisdom more clearly. Think about it this way. Have you ever tried to listen to a quiet piece of music in a noisy room? It's almost impossible, isn't it? But when the room becomes quiet, suddenly you can hear every note, every subtle nuance. The same is true with your own inner wisdom. When you stop creating noise through constant striving and proving, you begin to hear the quiet voice of your own truth. This is where the real transformation begins. Because when you start acting from this place of inner truth, something remarkable happens. You stop needing revenge altogether. You realize that the best response to those who don't see your value isn't to try to hurt them or teach them a lesson. It's to simply continue being who you are, shining your light, following your path. You know, one of the most beautiful things about spiritual growth is how it often comes in layers, like peeling an onion. Just when you think you've understood something, a deeper truth reveals itself. And that's exactly what we need to explore next in this principle of acting as if your absence is the best revenge. Let's talk about something that many spiritual teachers often overlook: the magnificent power of emptiness. In Eastern philosophy, there's a concept that the value of a vessel lies not in its material, but in the emptiness it creates. Think about that for a moment. A cup is useful not because of the clay it's made from, but because of the space it creates to hold something new. When you choose to step back from situations or relationships where your value isn't recognized, you're creating space. And nature, my friends, abhors a vacuum. But here's the crucial part. What fills that space is entirely up to you. I've observed something fascinating in my years of teaching and counseling. When people first hear about this principle, they often misinterpret it as a form of passive aggression. They think, I'll show them by leaving, and then they'll miss me. But that's still operating from the ego, isn't it? It's still seeking validation from outside ourselves. The true power of this principle lies in something far more profound. It's about creating space for your own evolution. When you stop investing energy in proving your worth to others, you suddenly have an abundance of energy to invest in your own growth. Think about the last time you felt truly at peace. Chances are, it wasn't when you were striving to prove something to someone else. It was probably in a moment when you were simply being fully present with yourself and your own truth. I remember counseling a talented musician who had been playing in a band for years. Despite his contributions, his bandmates consistently undermined his creative input and took him for granted. He would spend hours arguing for his ideas, trying to prove their worth, attempting to force his bandmates to see his value. One day, after a particularly frustrating rehearsal, he came to see me. He was angry, hurt, and ready to quit. But here's where the magic happened. Instead of advising him to leave the band in anger or to fight harder for recognition, I asked him a simple question. What would happen if you stopped needing their validation? The look on his face was priceless. It was as if someone had suddenly turned on a light in a dark room. He realized that his constant struggle for recognition was actually dimming his own creative. He was so busy trying to prove his worth that he had stopped growing as an artist. And so he made a decision, not to leave the band, at least not immediately, but to stop seeking their approval. He started focusing on his own musical growth. He began practicing new instruments, exploring different genres, writing his own songs. He still showed up for band practice, but his energy was different. He was no longer the person desperately seeking validation. He was someone exploring his own artistic journey. Do you know what happened? Within months, other musicians began seeking him out for collaborations. His own musical projects started taking off. And yes, eventually he did leave the band, not in anger or spite, but simply because he had outgrown that. His absence became a natural consequence of his growth, not a tactical move to prove a point. This, my friends, is the deeper truth behind acting as if your absence is the best revenge. It's not about the absence itself, it's about what you do with the energy you reclaim when you stop seeking external validation. But let me share something even more profound with you. When you truly understand this principle, something miraculous happens. You stop seeing situations in terms of presence versus absence. Instead, you begin to understand that you are always present to what matters most, your own divine nature. Think about the sun again for a moment. When clouds block its light, does the sun stop shining? Of course not. It continues to radiate, regardless of whether we can see it or not. Your true nature is just like that sun, constantly radiating regardless of whether others choose to see it or not. This brings us to another crucial aspect of this principle. The understanding that your absence in one space creates presence in another. When you stop pouring energy into situations that drain you, you become more present in situations that nurture. I've seen this transformation countless times. People who step back from draining relationships suddenly find themselves with energy to pursue long-forgotten dreams. Those who stop trying to prove themselves in toxic work environments discover talents they didn't know they had. It's as if the universe is waiting for us to create space before it can fill it with something better. But here's the part that might surprise you. As you practice this principle, you'll find that the concept of revenge becomes increasingly irrelevant because revenge is still a form of attachment, isn't it? It's still giving power to the situation or person you're trying to move away from. True freedom comes when you realize that your absence isn't about revenge at all. It's about alignment. It's about being true to your own divine nature. It's about recognizing that you don't need to prove anything to anyone because your worth is inherent, God-given, and absolute. This understanding transforms how you move through the world. Instead of asking, what will they think if I leave? You begin to ask, what am I called to become? Instead of wondering, will they miss me? You ponder, what am I meant to create? When you start operating from this level of consciousness, your presence becomes magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract attention, but because you're aligned with your true nature. People are naturally drawn to those who are authentic, who are living their truth without needing validation. Now let's dive even deeper into this transformative truth. You see, when we truly understand the power of acting as if our absence is the best revenge, we begin to see that it's not just about physical presence or absence. It's about energy, consciousness, and the profound power of choice. Every time you choose where to direct your energy, you're making a statement about your worth. Every time you decide what deserves your attention, you're declaring what you value. These aren't small decisions. They're profound acts of self-definition. But here's where many of us get stuck. We've been conditioned to believe that walking away means we've failed. That letting go means giving up. Nothing could be further from the truth. Sometimes walking away is the most powerful step forward you can. Let me share something that happened during one of my retreats. A successful executive, let's call him Robert, was struggling with a familiar dilemma. He had spent years building his department in a prestigious company, consistently delivering exceptional results. Yet, despite his contributions, He found himself in an environment where his innovative ideas were regularly dismissed, where his expertise was often questioned, where his value was constantly undermined. Robert's initial response was what most of us would do. He worked harder, longer hours, more detailed presentations, stronger arguments for his proposals. He was fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be valued. But in doing so, he was unknowingly participating in his own devaluation. During one of our sessions, I asked him a question that changed everything. What if your absence could speak louder than your presence ever could? The room went quiet. You could almost see the shift happening in his consciousness. He realized that by constantly fighting to prove his worth, he was actually reinforcing the idea that his worth needed to be proven. But here's the fascinating part. When Robert began to step back, not in anger or frustration, but in quiet confidence of his own value, something remarkable happened. The energy he had been pouring into proving himself became available for innovation, creativity, and growth. He stopped attending meetings where his input was consistently ignored. Instead, he used that time to develop new projects and mentor younger colleagues who were eager to learn. He ceased fighting for recognition and began focusing on excellence for its own sake. And you know what happened? His absence created a vacuum that spoke volumes. The projects he wasn't involved in began to falter. The meetings he didn't attend became less productive. His value became evident, not through his striving, but through the space left by his strategic absence. But remember, my friends, this isn't about playing games or manipulating outcomes. It's about something far more profane. It's about energetic integrity. It's about ensuring that your energy aligns with your worth. Think about water for a moment. When water encounters an obstacle, it doesn't fight, it flows around it. It doesn't diminish itself in the process. It simply finds another path. That's what we're talking about here, not absence as a form of surrender, but absence as a form of flow. This brings us to another crucial aspect of this principle. The understanding that every absence creates space for a new presence. When you stop investing energy in situations that diminish you, you create space for situations that elevate you. I've seen this truth play out countless times. People who step back from demanding toxic relationships suddenly find themselves surrounded by supportive, nurturing connections. Those who leave unfulfilling jobs often discover opportunities they could. It's as if the universe is waiting for us to create space before it can deliver what we truly deserve. The principle isn't just about external situations. It's about your relationship with yourself. When you stop fighting for external validation, you create space to hear your own inner wisdom more clearly. How much of your mental and emotional energy is currently invested in proving your worth to others? What could you create if you redirected that energy toward your own growth and evolution? You see, my friends, when you truly understand this principle, you realize that your absence isn't just about leaving situations that don't serve you. It's about becoming more fully present in your own life. This is where the magic happens. When you stop pouring energy into proving your worth to others, you begin to discover parts of yourself that were hidden beneath all that striving. You begin to hear the quiet voice of your intuition more clearly. You start to recognize opportunities that were always there but were obscured by your need for validation. But let me be clear about something. This journey isn't always easy. When you first begin to practice this principle, you might face resistance, both from others and from within yourself. The ego might whisper, but what if they forget about you? What if they succeed without you? What if they don't even notice you're gone? These fears are natural, but they're based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Your worth isn't determined by whether others notice your absence. Your value doesn't decrease just because someone fails to see it. Think about a masterpiece hanging in a museum. If someone walks past without noticing it, does that diminish its worth? Of course not. Its value is inherent regardless of whether any particular person recognizes it. The same is true for you. Your worth is inherent, God-given, absolute. It doesn't increase when others praise you, and it doesn't decrease when others ignore you. Understanding this truth is what allows you to step back from situations that don't honor your worth, not in anger or spite, but in quiet confidence of your own value. This understanding transforms how you move through the world. Instead of asking, how can I make them see my worth? You begin to ask, where can my worth be best expressed? Instead of wondering, what will they think if I leave? You ponder, what am I called to create? When you start operating from this level of consciousness, your presence becomes magnetic. Not because you're trying to attract attention, but because you're aligned with your true nature. People are naturally drawn to those who know their worth, who live their truth without needing validation from others. Now let's explore something truly transformative, how this principle of acting as if your absence is the best revenge becomes a catalyst for profound personal evolution. You see, my friends, when you begin to practice this principle authentically, something remarkable happens. You start to understand that your worth isn't just something you claim, it's something you embody. It becomes less about what you say and more about how you live. Let me share a profound insight that came to me during my morning meditation. I was reflecting on the nature of light and darkness, and it struck me, light doesn't fight darkness. It simply shows up in its full radiance, and darkness naturally. Your authentic power works the same way. When you're constantly trying to prove your worth, it's like using a flashlight to convince others that you can illuminate a room, but when you simply embody your worth, you become like the sun, radiating naturally without effort or explanation. This brings us to a crucial understanding. The most powerful absence isn't physical, but it's the absence of doubt about your own worth. It's the absence of the need to explain yourself. It's the absence of the compulsion. I remember working with a writer who was part of a prestigious literary circle. For years, she modified her writing style to fit what she thought would impress her peers. She would spend hours crafting sentences that she thought would earn their approval, often sacrificing her authentic voice in the process. One day, during a particularly honest conversation, she shared something heartbreaking. She said, I feel like I'm constantly auditioning for a role. I already have the role of being myself. Isn't that powerful? How many of us are constantly auditioning for roles we already have by divine, right? How many of us are trying to prove we deserve spaces we already occupy? The transformation began when she started to practice what we're discussing today. She stopped sharing her work with people who consistently undermined her confidence. She ceased attending literary events where she felt she had to perform a version of herself that wasn't authentic. But here's the crucial part. She didn't do this out of spite. She did it to create space for her authentic voice to emerge. And something magical happened. When she stopped trying to write for the approval of others, she began to write from the words that flowed through her weren't crafted to impress. They were offered as a gift from her heart to those who needed to hear them. This is the deeper meaning of acting as if your absence is the best revenge. It's not about depriving others of your presence. It's about honoring the sacred space where your authentic self emerges. Think about this. Every time you show up somewhere trying to prove your worth, you're actually absent from somewhere else. Absent from the space where your true gifts could be flourishing, absent from the relationships that could be nurturing your growth, absent from the work that could be channeling your authentic purpose. This understanding transforms how we approach everything in life. It becomes less about who we're trying to prove something to and more about what we're being called to become. Consider your own life for a moment. Where are you expending energy trying to be seen when you could be investing that energy and seeing yourself more clearly? Where are you fighting for acceptance when you could be accepting yourself more fully? But let me share something crucial here. This isn't about withdrawal from life. It's about engaging with life from a place of authenticity rather than anxiety. It's about showing up not to prove your worth, but to express your worth. I've observed that when people first begin to practice this principle, they often swing too far in the opposite direction. They withdraw completely, thinking that absence itself is the goal. But that's just another form of reaction, isn't it? True power lies in choosing your presence consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of your worth. Think about it this way. A master musician doesn't play to prove, they can make music. They play because music flows naturally from who they are. Your life can be lived the same way. You don't need to prove your value, you need only to express it. This brings us to another crucial aspect of this principle. The understanding that your absence creates space, not just in your own life, but in the lives of others. When you stop showing up in ways that diminish your worth, you give others the opportunity to recognize what they've taken for granted. But here's the beautiful paradox. By the time they recognize it, you'll no longer need their recognition, because you'll have discovered something far more valuable, the recognition of your own divine nature. This is where true freedom lies. When you no longer need others to validate your worth, you become free to express your worth authentically. When you no longer need situations to prove your value, you become free to choose situations that align with your values. When you begin living from this place of authentic self-worth, the very concept of revenge becomes irrelevant. Because revenge is still a form of seeking validation, isn't it? It's still giving power to the situation or person you're trying to impact. True power lies in becoming so deeply aligned with your authentic self that your absence or presence is no longer about others. It's simply about being true to who you are. As we come to the final part of our journey together today, I want to share something profound with you. Something that ties everything we've discussed into a transformative truth that can forever change how you move through the world. You see, my friends, when you truly understand and embody this principle of acting as if your absence is the best revenge, something miraculous happens. You discover that revenge itself becomes meaningless because you're no longer operating from a place of hurt or vindication. You're operating from a place of pure, authentic power. Think about this. Have you ever watched a master painter at work? They don't paint to prove they're an artist. They don't create to show others what they can do. They create because that's who they are. Their art flows naturally from their being. That's how your life should be, when you're aligned with your true nature. I want to share one final story with you. During one of my evening walks along the beach, I noticed something fascinating about the tide pools. When the tide goes out, it leaves behind these beautiful miniature ecosystems. But here's the interesting part. The ocean doesn't leave to prove anything to the shore. It's simply following its nature, its divine rhythm. And in that moment, I understood something profound about this principle we've been discussing. Your absence from situations that don't honor your worth isn't about making a statement to others. It's about being in harmony with your own divine rhythm. But let me share something crucial here, something that brings all of this together. The ultimate purpose of acting as if your absence is the best revenge isn't about the absence at all. It's about becoming so completely present to your own divine nature that nothing external can shake your sense of worth. Think about trees for a moment. In autumn, they let their leaves fall not to prove anything to anyone, but because it's part of their natural cycle of growth. Your journey of stepping back from situations that don't serve you is exactly like that. It's not an act of defiance, but an act of alignment with your own growth. This brings us to the deepest truth of all. And then you see, then this principle. You realize that it's not about absence or presence at all. It's about authenticity. It's about being so true to who you are that your choices naturally align with your worth. How would your life be different if you stopped trying to prove your value and simply live from your value? How would your relationships transform if you stopped seeking validation and started offering your authentic presence as a gift, one that others could either accept or decline without it affecting your worth? You see, my friends, when you begin living from this place of authentic self-worth, something remarkable happens. The energy you once spent trying to be seen, trying to be heard, trying to be valued, all of that energy becomes available for creation, for growth, for service to others. When you stop trying to prove your worth to others, you often find yourself making your greatest contribution to their lives, not because you're trying to, but because you're finally free to be who you truly are. This is where the magic happens. This is where transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Because when you're no longer consumed with proving your worth, you become available to express your worth in ways that serve the highest good of all. The most powerful absence you can create isn't from any particular situation or relationship. It's the absence of doubt about your own divine nature. It's the absence of the need to explain yourself. It's the absence of the compulsion to make others understand your worth. As you leave here today, I want you to remember this. Your worth isn't something you need to prove. It's something you need to express. Your value isn't something you need to defend. It's something you need to embody. Your power isn't in making others see your light. It's in being your light. The journey we've explored today isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you've always been. It's about reclaiming the truth that's been within you all along. That you are, by your very nature, infinitely valuable, inherently worthy, and divinely. So go forth from here today with this new understanding. Let your presence or absence in any situation be guided not by what you're trying to prove to others, but by what you know to be true about yourself. Let your choices be guided not by the need for validation, but by the call of your own authentic nature. The greatest revenge isn't in making others miss you. It's in becoming so completely yourself that the very concept of revenge becomes meaningless. Because when you're truly aligned with your authentic self, you don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You don't need proof. All you need is to be who you are fully and completely. And in that being, in that authentic expression of your true nature, you become not just powerful, you become transformative. Not just for yourself, but for everyone whose life the time has come for you to reclaim your power. Not through fighting or proving or seeking revenge, but through the simple, profound act of being authentically, unapologetically, magnificently yourself. Let that be your gift to the world. Let that be your legacy. Let that be your true presence. One that speaks so loudly that your absence becomes irrelevant. Thank you, my friends. Go forth and shine your light. The world is waiting for the gift that only you can give, the gift of your authentic self.